When Ireland emerged into the written historical period, it did so with a unified legal system, a unified language and culture, but one of the most disunited political situations in Europe. Every tribal group had its own king, and often there were regional kings over these local kings, who derived their power from a myriad of alliances. Yet how could such a political system based on tribal kingship lead to a unified law and language? The answer lies with the Druids. I am Kevin McLean. If you'd like to support this channel, please check out our Patreon page. While walking from Munster in the south to the Ullith in the north, around 600 AD, one would have crossed through the territory governed by dozens of different kings. Yet the laws overseen by the legal experts known as the Brehons were universal and applied across the whole of Ireland, and indeed into many areas in Scotland as well, anywhere Gaels settled and established their own territories. This legal universalism was something not seen in much the rest of Europe until many hundreds of years later. Yet to label the legal situation progressive or advanced is wrong. It was in fact archaic, perhaps the most archaic preserved in Europe, and rested on the acceptance of universal beliefs and an ancestry that united them. This law was almost certainly thought to have been derived from the gods, and several surviving law tracts are named after known gods like Dian Cecht and Goivnu. At the earliest time, this law was almost certainly overseen or derived from the Druids, while at a later period, a separate division of legal scholars developed to preserve, oversee, and in some cases modify the law, who became known as the Brehons, and thus the legal system comes to be known as Brehon law. The system of laws was known as Céin, and Uisneach was likewise called Céin Drum, the hill of law. Thus, the law emanated from the cosmic center, which Uisneach represented. Within the political disunity, the figures of the Druids, the Brehons, the Fili would have acted as unifiers of a single nation, representing the sacred and ancestral ways. Some scholars believe that there was no idea of the high kingship in early Ireland, and that this was a later development. However, it is possible that at some point in the Iron Age, there was a high king, and that this great kingdom later broke apart, fragmenting into the state that Ireland is found in the time of recorded Irish history. This would help explain the origin of the United Law, and that such an idea simply carried on from a time when the island was politically united. There is also mention of such a high kingship having once existed in Britain. According to Tacitus, the people of Britain believed that once there was a high king which had united them and commanded the whole of the island, but that at the present day they were fragmented into the kingship of local tribes. Perhaps this is only mythology, but perhaps it does reflect an actual historical reality. At the high point of Celtic expansion in the Iron Age, is it possible that perhaps several great Celtic kingdoms did exist that united huge areas behind them? Indeed, some mythology around Niall of the Nine Hostages claim that he not only united Ireland, but also subdued half of Europe. Added to the legal unity of early Ireland was a state of linguistic unity. In Old Irish, there is not a trace of regional dialects. Perhaps this is only reflective of the class of people who are writing in Old Irish, but it isn't until Middle Irish that there are traces of regional variations noted by scholars. This uniformity most certainly arose with the Druids and bards. The education of such men of learning relied on extensive memorization, often employing chanting as a method to assist this process. Through this method, a great uniformity and continuity in language was preserved, at least amongst this class of people. From the period of the archaic Irish of the Ogham stones to the period of the first Old Irish texts, a span of only a few hundred years, there is noted a massive change that takes place in the language. There are new letters, different sounds, lost grammatical case endings. What brought about such a swift, large-scale, and universal change in the language of Ireland? Perhaps nothing. It is possible, at least, that the inscriptions in archaic Irish reflect an ancient form of the language used by Druids and other sacred classes, and not one spoken by the average person for likely many hundreds of years. We have evidence from Rome that hymns performed in ceremonies were preserved through memorization, but were not understood even by those who had memorized them. In India, we have a better example, a cognate example perhaps, where ancient hymns and their language was preserved by the priestly class. Thus, the change between archaic Irish and Old Irish likely reflects a much longer development, and the true difference depends on the shift to Christianity, and thus the people writing the texts wrote in a common vernacular as opposed to the archaic sacred language preserved by the Druids. In Ireland and likely much of the Celtic world, it was the Druids that preserved the unity amongst the peoples. They operated beyond the scope of the tribe and facilitated a common culture, law, and spiritual beliefs. There was a common historical conception of the people, common gods, and one law for all who set foot upon the land of the Gaels, a law that was applied both to the poor peasants and to the kings. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please like, subscribe. Graf míle mágat as éisteach agus Marigoni Seas go hard.